Try HelloFresh UK to get 60% off your first box, 25% off for 2 months, and to of course help support this channel. Link is down in the description. Thank you for your support. Well, another 3-game week draws to a close in this championship season, and we are back to preview the last of them today. It is match day 19, and in this video, we're going to look ahead to all 12 weekend fixtures, give our score prediction and our reason why. As always, I'll encourage you to do exactly the same. Give me your score predictions in the comments below, and if you beat or match my overall score, you'll get a shout out in the recap ahead of next week's predictions as well. But for now, before we go and look ahead to all of these weekend fixtures, let's go and have a quick look back at midweek and see how we all got on. Because for me, it was a bit of a return to form, albeit without many of the perfect scores. I think the biggest thing we saw this midweek is far more goals than we expected. There were goals galore pretty much everywhere. And of course, the game I predicted 0-0 with two sides that hadn't scored in their last few games ended up being the 4-2 thriller of the week. However, I did get one perfect score and 8 correct outcomes overall. Thanks to the 3 points picked up in the final game at Ipswich, it does take me to 10 overall in this match day. And it was a fairly comfortable one to predict unless you went for lots of surprises, because most of the sides, the favourites at home, did manage to pick up their wins. A bit of a coupon buster in the game between bottom and top, as Sheffield Wednesday got a surprise late equaliser against Leicester. But overall, 10 points for me, not a bad outcome. But 3 of you did manage to beat that score, so you're going to get your quick shout out. In second place is BPK, who got 12 points, including 2 perfect scores, but then 2 leaders on 13. Mitchell, remarkably, with only 1 correct score, got 11 out of 12 outcomes right. That's a remarkable effort. And Alex, a very different way to get the 13 points. You got 3 perfect scores and only another 4 correct outcomes, but overall, a very good effort from you both. So well done to the 3 of you who did beat my score, but a return to form for me. Will I be able to maintain it this weekend? Let's go and get ahead to match day 19, and we start on Friday night football. Why on earth has this been picked for TV? It is Preston North End versus Queen's Park Rangers, 2 sides that are a little bit goal shy, and 2 sides whose weeks were defined by the scoreline of 4. Preston beaten 4-0 at Middlesbrough, an abject defensive display. I mean, let's be fair, bar that brilliant start to the season, the first 7 or 8 games, they've not been great, and they have been sliding at a rate of knots. Now, the big thing for Preston after last season is defensively, they're starting to look really suspect. They've conceded the most goals of anyone in the top half, the only side up there to concede 30 or more. And in the game against Borough, only 1 shot on target. We mentioned the fact they never dominate games, but quite often they're solid defensively, and in the last few weeks that has dried up a touch. 2 against Cardiff, no clean sheet in 7, and 4 against Borough, who were 3 up at half time. They rolled over essentially. It's a worrying time a little bit for Ryan Lowe. For QPR though, that much needed win, but boy did they make hard work of it. Facing 10 men for most of the second half, they still managed to fall behind at the hour mark, but in the end, 3 late goals turned the game around. Marty Cifuentes gets his first win to build on a couple of better defensive performances, but this one, very much a bit of an open book. QPR did create a lot more, which is a positive sign, but he didn't create a huge amount before they were playing against 10. Lots of corners, lots of set pieces came at the end, but was it a great performance? Was it enough to get you excited? I'm not too sure. What you can say, given some of the other results in midweek, it was an absolutely pivotal victory. So really important they got off the mark, but let's not get carried away here. I know Preston conceded 4. I know QPR scored 4. That ain't going to happen again. This game is going to be a poor game of football. Ryan Lowe will set up even more cautiously because of what's happened there. QPR will not be able to break it down, but will have a lot more of the ball. I can see there being very few shots on target, very few bits of quality, and it's going to finish 1-0 either way. On the balance of probabilities this season, I've gone for Preston to nick it by 1-0, but I do not expect a good game of football. And if you've got the choice, watch the FA Cup game on Friday night instead. Let's move on to Saturday lunchtime and a game that's a bit bigger at the top end of the table. It is 5th place West Brom versus leaders Leicester. And I tell you what here, if anything, the home side are in better form. West Brom backed up their good win against Ipswich with a cracking 1-0 on the road at Cardiff. It was a poor game. There was only 1 shot on target apiece, but West Brom had that moment of quality. And in the end, they keep a very good run going. 5 wins in the last 6, and they were unfortunate against Southampton to lose. Whereas Leicester, well, that's a little bit of a sickening blow, isn't it? We've seen them manage games really well this year. They've looked really efficient when leading in matches. And for the first time, they're throwing away points from that situation. Not an ideal scenario against a Sheffield Wednesday side that have been very poor this season, only won 1 game. But they had chances in that game against Leicester. And that's going to be the concern for Enzo Maresca. It is only 1 win in the last 4. And defensively, they look weaker in that game than they have for a long time. It almost looked like a bit of arrogance. You have got to reflect on the fact, though, that they've still not conceded more than 1 in a game, albeit they perhaps deserved to in that one. But the attacking threat is drying up a bit, and against a West Brom side who under Corberan are so solid defensively at home, I can see this being a frustrating day for Leicester City. I do feel West Brom have the capability at home. They've only conceded 7 goals in the 9 home matches, and while Leicester have been brilliant on the road and only conceded 7 themselves, if ever there's a time to face them, it is probably now. So I'm going to go for a Carlos Corberan special in this one. When he was at Huddersfield, we used to go for this all the time. I'm going for West Brom to win by 2-0. I just think Leicester are hitting a bit of a sticky spell for now. On to the 3 o'clock kickoffs, and we start with a big game for both Birmingham City and Rotherham United. Rotherham, of course, still managerless. Nathan Jones now the heavy favourite for the job. Got to be honest, I think that would be quite a good appointment. He loves being in charge of an underdog. Whereas for Birmingham City, what on earth is going on? No fear football is great, but you've got to be able to defend, and Blackburn Rovers carved them apart again. In fairness, you've got to say decent spirit from Birmingham to get back in the game from 3 down. They had loads of chances, they were creative, but ultimately they're still so leaky and open at the back, and Blackburn had their chances too. So, not really the most impressive display. It was fairly direct on the counter from Birmingham at times, and I know you want to play a certain way, but it's so counterproductive to the players they've got, the way they're setting up defensively at the minute, and it is costing them goals galore. That's 4 now in that one. They conceded 3 at Sunderland, 3 at Southampton. Away from home, goals galore going in. But at home, against Rotherham, the team with the worst away record in the league, a team that have picked up 1 point on the road all year, conceded 25 goals, including 4 against Hull City in midweek. You've got to win. There isn't an alternative. Rotherham don't create a lot on the road. Their defence is probably the most open in the Championship away from home. And for Wayne Rooney, if he's going to succeed, a bit like the Sheffield Wednesday game before, they've got to pick up a win here. And to be honest, it's got to be a little bit more convincing. I'm not sure it is going to be, but I do think they'll pick up the 3 points. If Rotherham had had a manager in by the weekend, I would have put this down as my potential surprise result of the weekend. But as it stands, I'm going to go for Birmingham to nick it just, but I don't think they're going to be brilliant. I'm going to go by 2-1, but I think Birmingham have to win. It's as simple as that. Let's move on to Hull City versus Watford. And after the gamble of goals galore in midweek for both sides, I'm tempted to go low scoring again. Watford, I've got to give credit to, because I think this is the first time we've seen a difference with Valérien Ismaël. I've criticised them at times this season for being a little bit too cautious, a little bit too compact. But in fairness, the Watford board, when extending his contract, surprisingly to many, did say he was putting in good things behind the scenes. And I've got to say this, Watford, particularly under Wilder towards the end of last year, you would never have seen them coming back from 2-0 down and those early setbacks. In fact, probably the biggest criticism labelled at the team by Chris Wilder himself when he was in charge is that they had no spine and no fight. Well, they certainly had it on Tuesday night, and while it wasn't the most encouraging start to the game, and there is some work to do defensively from it, you've got to say that based on the last year or so at Watford, that's an incredibly good sign. For Hull, again, we can't read too much into it. They played a Rotherham side who are useless away from home with the greatest of respect, but it is 3 unbeaten. They've done well at home recently, but against sides fighting at the bottom end of the table, or in the case of Preston, in poor form. So this Watford game's going to be an interesting one, I think. I can see it being tight, and I can see it being a lot lower scoring than probably the games in midweek were for both. So I'm going to go again for a 1-0. I was very tempted to go for a Championship's favourite scoreline, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if it ends up that way. But on this occasion, I'm going to go for Hull City to nick it 1-0. But I've got to say, I was actually impressed with Watford in midweek. So there you go. I'm not going to be that biased. Let's go and move on to Portman Road, the source of my perfect score in midweek. And this time it is Ipswich Town versus Coventry City. and both sides had a very good midweek outing. Ipswich beat Millwall pretty comfortably by 3-1, and again it was virtually game over at half-time. A really good display from the hosts, and again, they're their rampant best at home. They're so dominant, they press, they win the ball back, they keep it, and they create chances galore. They're fabulous to watch at home. On the flip side of that, Coventry just got the job done. Wasn't the greatest game against Plymouth, not many great chances for either side, but again, Haji Wright, that will be a huge confidence boost to him. He's not had the best start to his Coventry career, but there's flashes that there's a great player in there, and he's getting in those positions, which is probably the most positive sign. After a big win at Millwall at the weekend, important to get another win, and given their start to the season, Coventry, almost as important that they've picked up 3 clean sheets in a row. Against Ipswich away from home, that's going to be a pretty difficult task because they're one of the hardest teams to stop at Portman Road. They've got the best home form in the division and have scored 6 more than anyone else, and quite amusingly actually, them and Plymouth up from League One, the 2 top scorers at home in the division. But either way, I'm going to go for Ipswich to win this one. I think it will be quite a tight game. I've flitted between a few scorelines, but in the end, I've just opted for Ipswich to nick it, and I'm going to go by 2-1. Pretty low scoring and boring by their usual home standards. Almost at the halfway point and the voice is holding up, but this game is going to be massive. It is Leeds United versus Middlesbrough. Borough now on the surge after that slow start, and they bounce back from disappointment at the weekend with a 4-0 win at home to Preston. Okay, not much resistance from their visitors on the night, but a very good effort. Isaiah Jones looking a threat again, creating chances galore. And to be fair, that was Borough doing what they did most of last season under Carrick. For Leeds, a very comfortable win against Swansea City. A dismal start in the first minute, and again defensively not at their best, but Joel Pirro scoring against his former club, and then that crucial goal from Rutter on a stroke of half-time just made it a little bit more comfortable. Of course, we saw Leeds have the opposite effect just before the break at the weekend, so it was good for them to bounce back. They clearly deserve to win. Still a bit of a concern that they're not taking their chances because they're creating 4 or 5 great ones every game and should really be winning by a wider margin, but I'm sticking my neck on the line. I said it from the start of the season. Daniel Farke's team will start slow and they'll win the title. I still believe they've got a great chance at it. The gap to Leicester is now down to 8, and this game is going to be a telling one because Borough, they are going to come at them a little bit. They are going to be a threat on the counter. Can Leeds deal with that defensively? They should have more space to create chances, and we know Leeds will do that anyway. I actually think this is going to be a really good game. I'm surprised it wasn't picked for the TV one, but I'm going to go for goals galore. I can't separate the sides though. A bit like I mentioned in the Premier League predictions with the Luton-Brentford game yesterday. I think both defences will struggle to cope with their opposition attack, and as a result, I'm going for a thrilling 2-2 draw. Let's move on to the Den, where unfortunately this is 2 managers that are having an awful week. It's Millwall versus Sunderland, and the hosts, well, they started brilliantly on the road against Sheffield Wednesday, but 2 tougher tests followed. They've conceded 6 and they've been outplayed in both. Whereas Sunderland, a little bit of pressure surprisingly on Tony Mowbray. 4 points off the playoffs, having lost their star striker on deadline day, Amad Diallo, who was a key part last year. And yes, it's a couple of disappointing results, but the timing of coming up against Huddersfield just as they got most of their bench back, and the fact that Plymouth are in goal scoring form at home, it has made it a bit difficult. And the biggest difference for Sunderland this year is they're not scoring goals as consistently. They're having games where they're scoring 3s and 5s and whatever else, but there's a lot of games where they're not able to score 2 or more, and that was a hallmark of them, particularly on the counter-attack away from home last year. You look at their last 2 away games, they've drawn a blank in both of them, 3 in a row if you include Leicester as well. And this is where the test is going to come against Millwall. We've seen as Joe Edwards is trying to adapt their style that they've become incredibly open, and they are gifting up chances through wide areas on the counter-attack. Coventry and Ipswich were both able to take advantage, and Sunderland at their best would be absolutely rampant in a game like this last year. I'm going to bank on them to do it this time around. The pressure on Mowbray's ridiculous. I know they weren't their best defensively against Huddersfield, but they were still on the ball. They were still creating chances. They just came up against frustration. I mean, they had 13 blocked shots, I think it was by the end. It was just one of those days. I think they're going to bounce back at the weekend. I'm a bit worried about Joe Edwards and Millwall, so I'm going to go for Sunderland to win and Millwall to lose by the same score again. 3-1 to the Black Cats, and the pressure lifted on Mowbray. Let's go down to the southwest next, and another manager who's under pressure. Visiting Alex Neil for Stoke City at Plymouth Argyle. Plymouth lost 1-0 at Coventry in the week, but again, we mentioned it before, their home form is going to be the deciding factor this year. Unbeaten in their last three, beat Sunderland and Sheffield Wednesday with clean sheets, got a point against Borough. And on the road, do you know what? They've tightened up a little bit. They didn't give up as many chances against Coventry, which has been a bit of an Achilles heel for them this year on the road. So that's something we've got to take as a positive. And I'm looking at them this year and thinking, look, you haven't won an away game. You've been really solid at home. They're in the top 10 when it comes to their home record. They're the second top scorers behind Ipswich, as we mentioned. And Stoke City, whilst they did end a run with 3 without scoring in midweek, ill discipline in terms of fouls, in terms of cards, in terms of defending set pieces, there were a lot of worrying signs. And to go from looking so poor for a while after that brilliant opening day, to then have that 3 or 4 week period where they look like world beaters, and now they look atrocious. And QPR, they're not going to score 4 many times this season, 10 men or not. And the fact that after conceding the equaliser, they just caved in a little bit, they crumbled. I mean, what sort of Stoke side? It's sort of a hallmark of them. Traditionally, you expect Stoke to be great defending set pieces, to be solid, to be fighting till the end. And it's the basics that they're not doing right, which is probably the most alarming thing. They now struggle down to 17th place, but a couple of weeks they could look like a brilliant side again. You just never know. For me though, Plymouth at home, they've been excellent this season at Home Park. I think they're going to have too much going forward. Stoke haven't got enough to take constant advantage on the counter-attack. So I'm going to go for Plymouth to win. I'm going to go pretty comfortably. I'm going to go by 3-1 for Argyle. Let's move on to the side that produced the surprise of midweek as Sheffield Wednesday host Blackburn Rovers. Wednesday managed to get that late equaliser against Leicester. But can I just say this, forget the result. What an encouraging performance. They were a threat on the break, they gave up possession a bit and probably didn't play in the way that Danny Roll would ultimately like to. But when they did have it, they used the ball fairly well. And in the end, they thoroughly deserved the point they got late on. For Blackburn, they took advantage of a very brittle Birmingham defence, but again, allowed their opposition back into the game from 3-0 up, almost threw it away. And it's been the problem for Blackburn all season, hasn't it? Great at creating chances, whether or not they take them. They did on this occasion. But defensively, they're so suspect, and you just never know what you're going to get. As a result of that, they are the joint second highest scorers in the league. They're also one of the worst defences in the top half. Only Preston are worse. So you just think there's going to be goals in this game. Sheffield Wednesday's job is to put together 2 performances in a row, something they've not done at any point this season. Whereas for Blackburn, it's just a case of, can you be as creative as normal? If they keep pushing, if they're that relentless, they'll create chances and they'll get through this Wednesday defence. I'm going to bank on Wednesday to get a goal because Blackburn are so poor defensively. That puts them into double figures for the season if they do. But I'm going to go for Blackburn to nick it, and on this occasion, by 2-1. On to the final 3, and we start with 2 sides involved in 1-0s in midweek. It is Southampton versus Cardiff City. Southampton again keep up the unbeaten run with a 1-0 win against Bristol City. Wasn't particularly pretty. It relied on a stunning goal because they couldn't break City down otherwise, but they got the win. And those individual moments of magic are what they're going to be relying on. So good goal from Kyle Walker-Peters. Otherwise, the similar problem we've seen against Rotherham and so many other sides, Huddersfield as well. Keeping possession, looking very pretty. But what are you actually creating when a team comes and defends? That's the big question for Southampton now. I would expect Cardiff to come and do exactly that, which is going to make it a bit tricky. They did lose 1-0 at home to West Brom. It wasn't the worst performance in the world, and we know West Brom are a very good side. But again, not much creativity, not many chances. And in recent weeks for Cardiff, they've not quite been as much of a consistent goal threat. I mean, Preston and Norwich have been woeful in recent weeks, but none against Stoke, none against West Brom. It is a little bit of a concern. I can't see much of a reasoning for this being a high-scoring game. And if you take out the Birmingham game a few weeks ago, Southampton don't tend to win by more than 1. On this occasion, I am going to predict it. I do feel they'll break Cardiff down, and I'm a little bit worried about Cardiff's recent form. So I'm going to go for Southampton to nick this by 2-0. If Cardiff set up defensively and they don't score early, you never know. There might be the panic and another frustrating draw. As we move on to the final Saturday afternoon game, it is Swansea City versus Huddersfield Town. What a result for Huddersfield at Sunderland. Amazing what you can do when you can fill a bench, isn't it? Darren Moore must have loved turning around and having senior players he could bring on. It was a really good counter-attacking display. Yes, plenty of work to be done defensively, and on another day, it could have been 3-1 the other way. But you can't argue the players weren't playing for him. They were putting their bodies on the line. We mentioned the 13 block shots in the end, and they have a real threat on their counter with plenty of pace as well. There are some good players returning to that team, and as they get up to fitness, it's going to be a crucial time. They're going into the festive period, just getting their best squad back together. And I do really feel now they'll start to push away a little bit. This game is a very tricky one though, because Swansea will be smarting after that defeat at Leeds to only hold on to the lead for 2 minutes after scoring in the first of the game, and to do it to Joel Pirro as well. That'll be frustrating for them. The big problem for Swansea is in that little good run they had for a month or 6 weeks, they certainly cleaned up their act defensively. Back-to-back clean sheets followed by 8 conceded in 3 now. We've got to be fair, they're all against top 6 teams, and Huddersfield are not that. So I do feel that the teams they've been playing against maybe gives you a bit of a false dawn. Huddersfield is about how well those legs recover, how many of those players can start again. They don't want to be risking more 3, 4, 5 week injuries. For Swansea, I know the results haven't been great, but it's been a really tough run of games on paper. And I'm going to count on them to bounce back here, because a lot of people will look at it after midweek and say, oh, draw or Huddersfield win. I think Swansea are going to nick this. I think they will by 2-1. And ultimately, these are the games that are important for them if they're going to have a very comfortable season. Let's go and move on to the final game of the match day, which is a Sunday afternoon kickoff. It is Bristol City versus Norwich City, a new manager versus an under-pressure manager. Bristol City, as we mentioned, frustrated Southampton for large parts, and if it weren't for a stunning goal, it would have been a 0-0 draw, but we're yet to see a huge amount going forward regularly. Away from home in particular, they struggled to create against both QPR and Southampton. But in the last home game against Borough, they showed a lot of fighting spirit, albeit having thrown a lead away initially. Talking of throwing leads away though, what about Norwich City? A dream start at Watford, 2-0 up in 12 minutes against a side that are famous for folding and not coming back in the last year. And they've managed to lose the game. How on earth do you clutch defeat from the jaws of victory in that one? Again, it's the same pattern with Norwich this season. We mentioned the stat a number of times. Conceding 2 goals within a 5-minute window. They are in the bottom 3 for that. They had a few chances, but they gave up the ball, and when they got it, they didn't really use it well after that initial spell. And they're not a defence that at the moment can handle coming up against pressure. They've got a few decent players in there, but they're not settled. They're picking up loads of yellow cards and moments of ill discipline. And it doesn't appear on the face of it to be enough protection from that midfield. So I would wonder if he's going to tinker with the setup at some point. But overall, a very difficult game to predict. And you'll know, there's one scoreline I haven't predicted yet this weekend. I'm going to save it for Sunday afternoon. I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline. I had to do it once. I know it's very bold to say Norwich will only concede 1 in a game, but I'm going to go for a 1-1 to finish off. And hopefully that very uneducated prediction will remarkably find a way to come off. But with all of that out of the way, let's have a quick recap of what we've gone for matchday 19. I guess the standouts are the 2 teams I've got to score 3. Sunderland away at Millwall to continue Joe Edwards' difficult start, and Plymouth to score 3 at home to Stoke City and pile the pressure on Alex Neil. I've only gone for one Championship's favourite scoreline. I've gone for leaders Leicester to be beaten by 2-0, and the thriller of the week for me is at Ellen Road, as Leeds and Borough will play out a 2-2 draw. But those are just my predictions for matchday 19. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know yours in the comments below. If you beat or match my score, you will get a shout out in the next recap. That will be next midweek ahead of next weekend's fixtures. Between now and then though, we've got another Premier League preview because there's midweek fixtures in that next week, so keep an eye out on Sunday for Luton v Arsenal's preview and our Premier League predictions. If you've missed the ones for this weekend, you can find them up in the eye above with our Brentford v Luton preview. Come and join in the predictions fun over there as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do chuck a thumbs up on it. Thank you for putting up with my man flu affected voice. Subscribe and turn that notification bell on to make sure you don't miss anything over the festive period. And we'll see you back here on Sunday afternoon as we look ahead to Luton v Arsenal.